The rain was still clinging to my coat when I stepped into the office of Bright Futures Foundation. It was a small building, tucked away in our quiet Oregon town, with walls of polished oak and windows fogged by the morning drizzle. I counted 7 people in the room, 8 if you included the young assistant hovering by the door, pretending to organize files. The chairs were stiff, upholstered in dark velvet, and the table felt too large for the space, like it belonged somewhere grander. I sat at the far end, my hands folded tightly in my lap, feeling the damp chill of my sleeves against my wrists. No one looked at me. Not directly. Benjamin Holt stood at the head of the table. My son-in-law, 41 years old, with a pressed suit and a voice that carried the weight of authority. His hair was neatly combed, his tie a perfect knot, and his eyes never lingered on anyone for too long. He was Charles's opposite in every way, where my husband had been warm. Benjamin was all edges. He cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "We're here to discuss the final arrangements of Charles Thornton's estate," he began, his tone clipped, professional. "As executor of the Bright Futures Foundation and Charles's will, I'll outline the distribution of assets, including the foundation's $62 million in holdings." I nodded, though no one asked me to. My fingers tightened around each other, the cold of the room sinking deeper into my bones. I was 67 now, and I'd sat through enough meetings in this office to know how they worked. Charles and I had built this foundation from nothing, starting with a single after-school program for kids who needed a safe place to learn. We'd poured our hearts into it, our evenings, our savings, our dreams, but Charles was gone now, taken by his heart condition just 3 months ago, and I was here, alone, trying to hold onto what we'd made together. Benjamin's voice cut through my thoughts. Per the updated will, finalized before Charles's passing, all control of the foundation's assets, including liquid funds, real estate, and operational oversight, will remain under my direction as executive. He paused, letting the words settle. There are no distributions allocated to Mrs. Alice Thornton. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest. I kept my eyes on the table, tracing the grain of the wood with my gaze, afraid to look up and see the faces that wouldn't meet mine. No distributions, nothing. After 30 years of building this with Charles, my name was just gone. Erased, like a chalkboard wiped clean. I wasn't sure if I'd heard him right at first. The words felt distant, like they belonged to someone else's story. No one moved. The assistant by the door stopped shuffling papers. The board members, people I'd known for years, kept their eyes on their folders. Then, from across the table, I heard a soft rustle. Nora Caldwell, the foundation's former accountant and one of Charles's oldest friends, shifted in her seat. She was 59, with graying curls and glasses that always slipped down her nose. She'd left the foundation a year ago, but they'd brought her back as a consultant for this meeting. Her eyes met mine, just for a moment. It wasn't pity in her gaze, or surprise. It was something else, sharp, knowing, like she'd seen a thread the rest of us hadn't noticed. She held my stare, then glanced away, her lips pressing into a thin line. That look, it stayed with me, like a whisper I couldn't quite hear. Benjamin kept talking, passing out sleek folders to everyone at the table. Everyone but me. The pages were crisp, the text printed in clean black ink, outlining a future where I didn't exist. "The foundation will continue its mission under my leadership," he said, his voice steady as ever. "We'll expand our programs, streamline operations, and honor Charles's vision." Honor Charles's vision. The words stung, sharp and bitter. Charles's vision had been ours, built on late nights planning over coffee, on arguments about budgets and dreams about kids who deserved better. I'd been there for every step, every grant, every classroom we opened, but now, my name was nowhere in those folders. I wanted to speak, to ask why, to demand an explanation, but my throat felt tight, and the weight of the room held me still. The rain tapped softly against the windows, a quiet rhythm that seemed to mock the silence between us. I glanced at Nora again, hoping for another sign, but she was looking down now, her pen scratching notes on a legal pad. Benjamin folded his hands, signaling the meeting was over. "Any questions?" he asked, his eyes sweeping the room but never landing on me. No one spoke. The board members gathered their folders, their chairs scraping against the floor as they stood. I stayed seated, my coat still damp, my hands still clasped. As the room emptied, Nora lingered, adjusting her scarf with deliberate slowness. She didn't say anything, but that glance, brief, intentional, felt like a lifeline. It was as if she was telling me to wait, to hold on, that this wasn't the end of the story. I didn't know what she knew, or why she'd looked at me that way. But as I left the office, stepping back into the gray drizzle, I carried that moment with me. It was small, fragile, but it was enough to keep me from breaking. The walk back to the house was longer than it should have been. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but my coat was still heavy, clinging to my shoulders like a weight I couldn't shake. Our home, Charles's and mine, sat at the end of a quiet street. Its white clapboard faded from years of Oregon weather. The porch creaked under my steps. A familiar sound that used to feel like a welcome. Now, it just sounded tired. I pushed the door open, and the air inside hit me like a stranger's. It wasn't home anymore. Not really. The living room was too neat, too polished. The shelves, once crowded with Charles's books on education and my old lesson plans, were bare now, wiped clean. The photographs, snapshots of us with kids from the foundation, smiling at ribbon cuttings or summer camps, were gone. Even the quilt we'd draped over the couch, the one my students had made for me when I retired, was missing. In its place was a sleek throw blanket, gray and stiff, like something from a catalog. I stood there, my boots leaving wet prints on the hardwood, and felt the house closing in around me. Benjamin had been here. I could tell by the precision of it all. He'd always been like that, organized, efficient, cold. Charles used to say he was a good manager, but I'd always seen something else in him. A hunger, maybe, a need to control. And now, just 3 months after Charles's heart gave out, Benjamin had swept through our home like a storm, stripping it of us, of me. On the kitchen table sat a small cardboard box, my name written in Benjamin's sharp, blocky handwriting. No note, just Alice in black marker. I opened it slowly, half expecting it to be empty. Inside was a pearl necklace Charles had given me on our 10th anniversary. Its clasp worn from years of use. There was a notebook, too, one I'd used to jot down ideas for the foundation in its early days, scribbles about tutoring programs and community grants. And a ceramic mug, the one with the Bright Futures logo, chipped at the rim from years of morning coffee. That was it, my life with Charles, reduced to 3 small things. I picked up the mug, running my thumb over the faded logo. It felt like holding a memory that didn't belong to me anymore. I set it down and walked through the house, room by room, looking for something, anything, that Benjamin hadn't touched. The study, where Charles used to grade papers late at night, was sterile now. His desk was empty, the drawers cleared out. The bulletin board, once pinned with thank you notes from students, was gone, replaced by a blank wall that gleamed with fresh paint. Even the air smelled wrong, sharp with the scent of cleaning solution, like the house had been scrubbed of us. I thought back to Charles's funeral. Just a few weeks ago, Benjamin had planned it all, down to the flowers, the music, the exact order of the speeches. Lilies filled the church, their sweetness so thick it made my head ache. The slideshow was perfect. 16 minutes of Charles's life. From his teaching days to the foundation's first big grant. Benjamin stood at the podium in a tailored suit, his voice steady as he spoke about Charles's legacy. Not a single falter, not a single mention of me. No one asked if I was okay. Not the neighbors who'd shared potlucks with us. Not the board members who'd hugged me at foundation events. Not even the parents of the kids we'd helped. I'd sat in the front pew, alone, watching the faces blur through tears I didn't let fall. In the car afterward, Benjamin drove in silence, his hands tight on the wheel. I told myself it was grief, that he didn't know what to say. But standing in this house now, with its bare walls and empty shelves, I knew it wasn't grief. It was erasure. I sank into the armchair by the window, the one piece of furniture Benjamin hadn't touched. It was old, its cushions sagging from years of use. But it still held the shape of Charles's shoulders from evenings spent reading together. I closed my eyes, trying to picture him, his glasses slipping down his nose, his laugh when I teased him about his terrible handwriting. But the image kept slipping, replaced by the memory of Benjamin's voice in that meeting, cold and final, No distributions allocated to Mrs. Alice Thornton. I opened my eyes and saw the box again, sitting on the table like an accusation. I reached for the notebook, flipping through its worn pages. My handwriting, Charles's, ideas we'd tossed around over late-night coffee, a grant for a reading program, a plan for a summer camp, a dream we'd built. Page by page, I pressed my hand to the paper, as if I could hold onto it, as if it could keep me anchored. But then I saw the note tucked inside the box, folded so neatly I'd almost missed it. Benjamin's handwriting again, precise and unfeeling. These are the items deemed appropriate for you to keep. Deemed appropriate, like I was a guest in my own life. I set the note down, my hands trembling, and looked around the room again. The house wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to Benjamin now. To his version of the story, one where I didn't exist. I stood, my knees unsteady, and walked to the front door. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and still. I didn't know what I was looking for. Not yet, but Nora's glance from the meeting kept circling in my mind. Sharp and certain. It was a thread, thin but strong, and I wasn't ready to let it go. Not yet. Something told me this house, this life, still held pieces of Charles, and pieces of me, that Benjamin hadn't found. And I was going to find them first. I couldn't sleep that night. The house was too quiet, too empty, like it was holding its breath. I sat in Charles's old armchair, the one Benjamin hadn't touched, and stared at the cardboard box on the kitchen table. That pearl necklace, the chipped mug, the notebook, they were all I had left of him, of us. But something about Nora's glance in that meeting kept tugging at me. Like a loose thread I couldn't ignore. It was a look that said she knew more than she could say. Not there, not then. I needed to find out what. The next morning, I went to the small library Charles had built in the back of the house. It wasn't much, a narrow room with sagging shelves, filled with books on teaching, child psychology, and stories we'd read to the kids at Bright Futures. I hadn't been in here since Charles got sick. It hurt too much to see his handwriting in the margins, his notes on how to make learning fun for a kid who'd never had a chance. But now, I needed something, anything, that Benjamin hadn't swept away. I ran my fingers along the spines, dust clinging to my skin. Most of the books were still here, untouched, their pages yellowing at the edges. I pulled one out at random, The Courage to Teach. A book Charles loved, one he'd read aloud to me on quiet evenings, his voice steady and sure. As I opened it, a folded piece of paper slipped out, fluttering to the floor. My heart stopped for a moment. I knelt, my knees creaking, and picked it up. The handwriting was Charles's, shaky but unmistakable. The ink smudged like he'd written it in a hurry. Benjamin's pushing to change everything. The will, the foundation, all of it. He says it's for efficiency. But I don't trust him. I'm too weak to fight him now. Alice, I'm sorry. If you find this, ask Nora. She knows. I read it twice, then a third time, my hands trembling so hard I nearly dropped the paper. Charles had known. He'd seen what Benjamin was doing. Even as his heart was failing him, he'd hidden this note, tucked it away in a book he knew I'd recognize, like a message meant only for me. I pressed the paper to my chest, feeling the weight of his words, his fear, his love. For the first time since that meeting, I didn't feel alone. I found Nora's number in an old address book, one Benjamin hadn't thrown out. My fingers hesitated over the phone, the weight of reaching out settling heavy in my chest. Nora and I hadn't spoken much since Charles's funeral. She'd been close to him, not me, but I remembered the way she'd hugged me that day, her arms steady when mine were shaking. If Charles trusted her, so would I. She answered on the third ring, her voice soft but surprised. Alice, is everything okay? I didn't know where to start, so I just said it. I found something, Nora, something Charles left. He said to ask you. There was a long pause, the kind that carries its own weight. Meet me at the cafe by the community library. She said finally, 10 o'clock tomorrow. Bring what you found. The cafe was a small place, tucked behind the library where Charles and I used to run reading programs. It smelled of burnt coffee and cinnamon, and the windows were streaked with rain. Nora was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a mug of tea and a worn notebook in front of her. Her gray curls were pulled back, and her glasses sat low on her nose. just like I remembered. She looked up as I slid into the seat across from her. And for a moment, neither of us spoke. I handed her the note. My hand still unsteady. She read it carefully, her brow furrowing deeper with every line. When she finished, she set it down and looked at me, her eyes sharp but tired. I knew something was wrong. She said, her voice low, "Charles called me a few months before he passed. He was in the hospital, barely able to talk, but he kept saying Benjamin was moving too fast, changing things he didn't understand." "What things?" I asked, leaning forward, my heart pounding. Nora hesitated, glancing around the cafe like she was afraid someone might overhear. "The will, the foundation's accounts. Charles said Benjamin was pushing him to sign papers, even when he was too weak to hold a pen. I was still the accountant then. And I saw things, transfers, withdrawals, that didn't add up. Small amounts at first, but enough to make me question." She reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive. Small and unassuming, the kind you'd overlook in a drawer. "This has copies of financial reports from last year," she said, "and something else, a recording. I didn't mean to keep it, but I couldn't let it go." "A recording?" My voice was barely above a whisper. Nora nodded, her fingers tightening around her mug. "It was a meeting, late one night at the foundation. Benjamin didn't know I was still in the office, finishing some paperwork. He was talking to one of his assistants. Someone new, someone he trusted. I recorded it on my phone, just in case. He said things about Charles, about the will, about moving money to accounts that didn't belong to the foundation." I stared at her, my mind racing. "What did he say, Nora?" "Exactly." She looked down, her voice dropping even lower. "He said Charles was too sick to notice, that the signature didn't matter because no one would check. He said the foundation was his now, that he'd make sure it stayed that way." And he laughed. Alice, like it was a game. The air in the cafe felt heavier, the hum of conversation fading into the background. I could still see Benjamin's face from the meeting, his calm, controlled smile as he erased me from Charles's legacy. But now, I had something, a note, a recording, a truth he didn't know I'd found. I looked at Nora, her hands steady despite the weight of what she'd just shared. "Why didn't you say anything before?" I asked, not accusing, just trying to understand. She sighed, pushing her glasses up. "I was scared. I have a daughter, a grandson. I didn't want trouble. But when I saw you in that meeting, when Benjamin said you'd get nothing, I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Charles would have wanted me to help you." I reached across the table, my hand covering hers for a moment. "What do we do now?" Nora's eyes met mine, that same sharp, knowing look from the meeting. "We take this to someone who can help. Someone Charles trusted, but we have to be careful. Benjamin's not going to let this go easily." I nodded, clutching the USB drive she slid across the table. It was small, but it felt heavy in my hand, like it held the weight of everything Charles and I had built. I didn't know what came next. Not exactly, but for the first time since that meeting, I felt a spark of something, hope. Maybe, or defiance. Benjamin thought he'd taken everything, but he hadn't found this. Not yet. The invitation arrived in a cream envelope, the kind too heavy for everyday mail. It was addressed to me in elegant script, my name spelled out carefully, Alice Thornton. I almost didn't open it. Part of me wanted to toss it into the kitchen drawer with the bills and forget it existed. But I slid it open. And there it was, a card for the 25th anniversary celebration of Bright Futures Foundation. Black tie, cocktails at 6. A program honoring Charles's legacy at 7. Benjamin's name was printed in bold next to his new title, proposed chairman. The words felt like a slap. Sharp and deliberate. I hadn't planned to go. The thought of standing in a room full of people who'd forgotten me, who'd let Benjamin rewrite our story, made my stomach turn. But Nora's voice was in my head, steady and sure from our meeting at the cafe. "We take this to someone Charles trusted," she'd said, and I knew who that was. Walter Green, a retired principal who'd been on the foundation's board since the beginning. He'd known Charles since their teaching days, back when we were all young and full of ideas. If anyone would listen, it was him. The night of the celebration, I dressed carefully, a simple navy dress, the pearl necklace from Charles, my hair pinned back. I didn't want to stand out. Not yet. The community center was lit up. Strings of lights draped across the ceiling. Tables covered in white linen. The air buzzed with soft laughter and the clink of glasses. But it felt hollow to me. Like a stage set for someone else's play. I slipped through the crowd. A shadow in a room of familiar faces, donors, volunteers, people who'd once called me by name. Now, they smiled politely, their eyes sliding past me. Unsure who I was without Charles by my side. Benjamin was near the stage. Impeccable in a tuxedo, shaking hands with a practiced smile. He looked like he belonged there. Like he'd always been the one steering the foundation. I watched him, my heart pounding. The USB drive Nora had given me tucked into my purse. It held the recording, Benjamin's voice. Admitting he'd faked Charles's signature. Admitting he'd moved money to accounts that weren't the foundation's. It was enough to unravel everything. But I had to be careful. Benjamin wasn't careless. He'd fight back. I spotted Walter Green in the third row. His white hair catching the light as he adjusted his glasses. He was alone, sipping a glass of water. His face lined with the kind of quiet wisdom that comes from years in a classroom. I made my way to him, my steps deliberate, and took the seat beside him. "Walter," I said softly, "it's good to see you." He turned, his eyes crinkling with a smile. "Alice, I didn't expect you here." His voice was warm, but there was a question in it. Like he sensed I wasn't here for the speeches. I pulled the USB from my purse. Along with a folded copy of Charles's note from the book. I slid them into a small envelope. My hands steady despite the knot in my chest. "This is for the board," I said, keeping my voice low. "It's about Charles, about what he wanted. Please, just look at it." Walter's brow furrowed, but he took the envelope, slipping it into his coat pocket without a word. He didn't ask questions, just gave a slow nod. The kind that said he understood more than he let on. That was enough for me. I stood, smoothing my dress, and moved to the back of the room before the program began. Benjamin took the stage as the lights dimmed, his voice smooth and confident. "Tonight, we honor Charles Thornton's vision," he said, gesturing to a screen where photos of Charles flashed, teaching in a classroom, shaking hands at a fundraiser, smiling with kids at the foundation. My throat tightened. Those were our moments, our life, and Benjamin was claiming them as his own. He spoke of expansion, of new programs, of a future he'd lead. The crowd clapped, their applause polite but warm. I caught Benjamin's eye as he stepped down from the stage. For a moment, his smile faltered, just a flicker, like he'd seen something he hadn't expected. Me, maybe, or the envelope I'd given Walter. He turned away quickly, shaking hands with someone else. But I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped his glass a little too tightly. 2 days later, Nora called me. Her voice was clipped, urgent. "The board postponed the vote," she said. "They're not moving forward with Benjamin's appointment." "Not yet." I sat down hard in Charles's armchair. The phone pressed to my ear. "What happened?" "Walter opened your envelope," she said. "He listened to the recording. He didn't say much, but he called an emergency meeting. They're asking questions now, Alice, about the will, the accounts, everything." I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. It wasn't over. Not yet, but it was a start. Then, that afternoon, a letter arrived from Benjamin's legal team. 4 pages, printed on heavy paper, accusing me of defamation, of interfering with the foundation's operations. They threatened legal action if I continued to spread falsehoods. I read it once, then set it on the kitchen table, next to the chipped Bright Futures mug. It didn't scare me, not anymore. Nora wasn't done. She called again that evening. Her voice quieter now, but steady. "There's someone else who can help," she said. "Ethan, one of the IT guys from the foundation. He left a few months ago. But he's got copies of emails, ones Benjamin thought were deleted. They show he was moving money, planning the will change before Charles even got sick." I gripped the phone, my heart racing. "Can we trust him?" "He worked with Charles," Nora said. "He didn't like what Benjamin was doing. But he was too junior to say anything then. He'll talk now, if we ask." I looked at the envelope from Benjamin's lawyers, still sitting untouched. They thought they could silence me, scare me into disappearing. But Charles's note, Nora's recording, Ethan's emails, they were pieces of a truth Benjamin couldn't erase. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was fighting, not just for me, but for Charles, for the kids we'd built this foundation for. And I wasn't going to stop. The days after the anniversary celebration felt like holding my breath. The letter from Benjamin's lawyers sat untouched on my kitchen table. Its sharp words, defamation, interference, damages, staring up at me like a dare. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Norris recording, Charles's note, Ethan's emails, they were more than just evidence. They were pieces of Charles. Pieces of the life we'd built. And I wasn't going to let them slip away. Nora arranged a meeting with a lawyer she trusted. A woman named Laura Bennett, who specialized in probate and fraud. We met in a small office downtown. Its walls lined with books and a single window letting in pale Oregon light. Laura listened quietly as I laid out everything. The note in the courage to teach. Norris USB drive. The emails Ethan had pulled from the foundation's servers. She played the recording, Benjamin's voice filling the room. Cold and certain. Charles was too sick to notice. The signature doesn't matter. No one's going to check. And then, the part that made my stomach turn, we move the money now. Before anyone asks questions, Laura leaned back, her pen tapping softly against her desk. This is enough, she said. The recording, the emails, Charles's medical records, they show he wasn't in any state to sign those papers. He was in the hospital, sedated, when Benjamin claimed he approved the will. She looked at me, her eyes steady. And the financial transfers? Those are a bigger problem for him. He wasn't just changing the will. He was siphoning money from the foundation. I nodded, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. What happens now? We take this to the board, Laura said, and we file a motion to correct the foundation's records. You don't have to sue, Alice. You can just ask for the truth to be set right. That's what I wanted. Not money, not revenge, just the truth, Charles's truth. Our truth, written where it belonged. A week later, Nora got a call from Walter Green. His voice was quiet, almost grim. Benjamin's stepping down, he said. He sent a statement this morning. Says he's focusing on family. Stepping back to honor Charles's legacy. Nora snorted softly when she told me, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. He's running scared, Alice. The board listened to the recording. They saw the emails. They know. Benjamin's statement was printed in the local paper. A single paragraph buried on page 3. No apology, no admission, just a polished exit, like he was bowing out of a play he'd already won. But I didn't care about his words. I cared about what came next. Walter called me himself that afternoon. His voice softer than I'd expected. Alice, we're updating the foundation's charter. Your name's being restored as co-founder. Effective immediately. Lifetime advisor. 2. If you'll have it. I sat in Charles's armchair. The phone pressed to my ear. And felt something loosen in my chest. Co-founder. The word felt like a hand reaching out. Pulling me back into the story I'd been written out of. Thank you, Walter, I said, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. That's all I wanted. But there was one more piece I needed to find. One more thread to tie. I went back to the community library. The place where Charles and I had started our first reading programs. It was quiet that morning. The shelves bathed in soft light. The air smelling of old paper and wood polish. I wandered to the education section. My fingers brushing the spines until I found another copy of The Courage to Teach. I don't know why I picked it up. Maybe I was hoping for another note. Another piece of Charles. And there it was, tucked between the pages, a letter. Written in Charles's careful handwriting. Dated a year before he got sick. To the Bright Futures Board. It began, this foundation is as much Alice's as it is mine. She's the heart of it. The reason it works. If anything happens to me, protect her. Make sure her name stays where it belongs. It was signed, not with a lawyer's stamp, but with his conviction, his love. I held the letter, my hands trembling, and felt the weight of it settle into me. Not triumph, not anger, just a quiet certainty. Charles had seen this coming. He'd known Benjamin's ambition, and he'd tried to protect me, even when he couldn't protect himself. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my purse. It wasn't for the board. Not anymore. It was for me. Laura helped me file the letter with the county archive. Not as part of a lawsuit, but as a historical correction. A record of what Charles and I had built together. By noon, it was done, my name restored. My place secured, not as a footnote, but as truth. I didn't need a courtroom or a settlement. I needed this, the quiet weight of Charles's words, holding me steady. That evening, I walked to the community library again. It was closing time, the last of the kids gathering their backpacks, their laughter echoing through the stacks. I sat on a bench near the reading corner, where we'd once taught kids to love books. A small plaque had been added to the wall, simple and unassuming, for those who built the future. Quietly, no names, no fanfare, but I knew what it meant. I traced the edge of the plaque with my finger, the cool metal grounding me. The library was still, the light softening as the sun dipped low. I didn't need to be seen. Not by the board, not by Benjamin, not by anyone. I needed this, the truth, whole and unbroken, resting where it belonged. Charles was gone, but his love, our work, was still here, and so was I. I sat in the community library long after the kids had gone, their laughter still echoing in my mind. The light was fading now, slipping through the windows in soft, golden streaks, dusting the bookshelves with a quiet glow. I leaned back on the bench, my fingers resting on the small plaque that read, "For those who built the future." Quietly. It wasn't much, just a few words etched in metal, but it felt like enough. More than enough. I thought about Charles, about the years we'd spent building bright futures, teaching kids to read, to dream, to believe in something bigger than themselves. I thought about Benjamin, his polished suits and his calculated words, trying to erase me from that story. He almost had, but Charles had known, even in his final days, weak and fading in that hospital bed. He'd left me a note, a letter, a truth that couldn't be buried. And Nora, with her sharp eyes and steady hands, had carried it forward. So had Walter, and Ethan, and Laura. They'd all helped me find my way back to where I belonged. I didn't need a spotlight. I didn't need my name in bold letters or a check to make things right. What I needed was this, the library, the plaque, the weight of Charles's love in that letter I carried in my purse. "She's the heart of it," he'd written, and sitting here, surrounded by the books we'd loved, the ideas we'd shared, I felt it. I was still here. The heart of it was still beating. Life doesn't always give you the endings you expect. Sometimes, it's messy, quiet, incomplete, but the truth, once it's spoken, doesn't fade. It stays, tucked into the corners of the world, waiting for someone to find it. Charles and I had built something that mattered, not just for us, but for the kids who'd walked through these doors, for the teachers who'd carry it on. That was the legacy, not the $62 million, not the titles or the boardrooms. It was the quiet work, the love that held it all together. I stood, smoothing my coat, and took one last look at the library. A new group of kids would come tomorrow, their voices filling the space, their stories just beginning. I smiled, thinking of Charles, of the way he'd grin when a shy reader finally raised their hand. He was gone, but he was here, too, and so was I. If you've ever fought to hold on to something true, something you built, something you loved, then you know what it means to keep going. Even when the world tries to write you out. Share your story, let it be heard, because the truth, no matter how small, always finds its way to the light.